Vesna Vulović. Vesna Vulović was a flight attendant for Yugoslav Airlines, working a routine passenger flight from Copenhagen to Belgrade on January 26, 1972. Somewhere over Czechoslovakia, the plane exploded. The aircraft broke apart at 33,330 feet, roughly 6 miles above the ground, and Vesna, still strapped to a section of fuselage, fell the entire distance with nothing beneath her. No parachute, no pressurized cabin, just open air and 6 miles of gravity. She hit the ground. She was the sole survivor, and to this day holds the Guinness World Record for the highest fall ever survived without a parachute. Roy Sullivan. Roy Sullivan was a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, a man whose job kept him outdoors across open meadows and exposed ridgelines for the better part of every working day. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary career. Then lightning struck him. Then it struck him again. Then 5 more times after that, across a span of 35 years, turning Roy Sullivan into the most lightning-struck human being in recorded history. His first strike came in 1942. He was hiding from a storm inside a fire lookout tower when a bolt punched through the structure, burned a strip down his right leg, and blew clean through his toenail on the way out. He was 37 years old. He walked away. 27 years passed without incident. Then, in 1969, lightning struck his truck while he was driving a mountain road, jumped from the vehicle directly to his left shoulder, and set his eyebrows on fire. In 1970, it happened again in his own front yard, knocking him off his feet and burning the same shoulder a second time. He began telling people he thought something was wrong with him. The strikes kept coming. In 1972, a bolt found him inside a ranger station and set his hair alight. He smothered the flames with his hands and drove himself to the nearest hospital. In 1973, another strike hit him while he was on patrol, once again igniting his hair and burning his chest. By this point, he kept a dedicated bucket of water in his truck at all times. In 1976, a 6th bolt burned his ankle while he was checking trail conditions. In 1977, while fishing at a campground, a 7th strike hit his chest and stomach. He doused himself in a nearby stream. He was back at work the following week. Doctors and meteorologists who examined his case could offer no definitive explanation beyond occupational exposure. Rangers spend more time in open, elevated terrain than almost any other profession. The odds of being struck by lightning once in a lifetime are approximately 1 in a million. 7 strikes across 35 years places so far outside statistical probability that no formal model adequately captures it. Colleagues at the park gave him a nickname, the Human Lightning Rod. Guinness World Records officially recognized Roy Sullivan as the most lightning-struck person in history. He died in 1983 from an entirely unrelated cause. Lightning had nothing to do with it. Julian Köpke. Julian Köpke was a 17-year-old German student on LANSA Flight 508, flying home to Lima, Peru, with her mother on Christmas Eve, 1971. The route crossed the Amazon basin. The flight was expected to take under an hour. Then the aircraft entered a violent thunderstorm. Lightning struck the right fuel tank. The wing ignited, the fuselage tore apart at roughly 10,000 feet, and Julianne, still strapped into a row of 3 seats, was thrown into open air above 2 miles of unbroken jungle canopy. She fell in a slow spiral. The seat assembly acted as a crude auto-rotation device and crashed through the canopy into the forest floor below. She lost consciousness on impact. She woke up the following morning. Her collarbone was broken. A gash ran along her right arm. One eye was swollen nearly shut. Her mother, seated beside her on the flight, was gone. Of the 92 people aboard, Julianne was the only one who had survived the fall. She had no food, no map, 1 sandal, and a single candy bar. Her father was a biologist who had spent years conducting research in the Amazon, and he had told her once that if she was ever lost in jungle terrain, she should find water and follow it downstream. A stream would become a river. A river would eventually reach people. She found a small creek and began walking. She did not know how far she was from help. She did not know if anyone was looking for her. She knew only to follow the water. She walked for 11 days. The gash on her arm became infected and filled with maggots. She counted approximately 35 of them inside the wound, before locating a canister of gasoline at an abandoned shelter and flushing them out. She ate almost nothing. Her weight dropped visibly. On the 11th day, she found a small motorboat moored beneath a lean-to on a riverbank. She waited beside it overnight, and the next morning 3 local loggers arrived. They treated her wounds with engine oil to kill the remaining parasites, built a raft, and guided her downriver to the nearest village. A small aircraft flew her to a hospital in Pucallpa. Of the 92 people aboard Lanza Flight 508 that Christmas Eve, Julian Kupka was the only survivor. Had her father never worked in the Amazon, she would almost certainly have died within the first 2 days. Paul Templer. Paul Templer was a professional wildlife guide who had led canoe safaris along the Zambezi River in Zimbabwe dozens of times without incident. It was routine work: calm water, experienced guides, tourists watching hippos from what everyone assumed was a safe distance. The Zambezi runs through some of the most densely hippo-populated river stretches in Africa. Guides understood the risks and followed strict protocols. The protocols had always worked until this particular afternoon. On one particular afternoon in 1996, the group was making its way through a stretch of river when one of Paul's colleagues, a guide named Evans, was struck from below by a territorial hippopotamus and capsized directly in front of it. Paul paddled toward him without hesitating. He reached Evans and had nearly pulled him clear when the hippo surfaced directly beneath Paul's canoe, launching him into the water. Paul resurfaced, located Evans, and reached out toward him a second time. That was the last deliberate action he took before the hippo's jaws closed around him from behind. He was swallowed to the waist. The world became total darkness and a crushing, uniform pressure that compressed his ribs and drove the air from his lungs. He could feel heat. He could feel the slow, enormous contraction of muscle around him. He understood, with the particular clarity that arrives just before death, that he was going to die inside the mouth of a hippopotamus in Zimbabwe, and that there was nothing he could do about it. What saved Paul Templer was the man directly behind him. His colleague Fred Rundle, another guide on that day's safari, had watched the entire sequence from his own canoe and paddled to within arm's reach of where Paul had gone under. When the hippo briefly opened its jaws, a reflex, not a mercy, Fred grabbed Paul's legs and pulled. The hippo released him. Paul surfaced, bleeding heavily from puncture wounds across his torso, left shoulder, and both arms. His colleagues lifted him into a canoe. He later described the inside of the hippo's mouth as total sensory deprivation. No light, no sound, only heat and the slow compression of enormous muscle closing from every side. He lost his left arm, which surgeons determined was too extensively damaged to save, and underwent reconstructive surgery to repair 40 separate puncture wounds across his body. He spent months in hospital, then months more in rehabilitation. He returned to work as a guide. Had Fred Rundle not been positioned directly behind him at the precise moment the hippo's jaws opened, Paul Templer would have drowned in the Zambezi River in under 30 seconds. Harrison O'Keefe. Harrison O'Keefe was a ship's cook aboard the Jason Akes, a tugboat contracted to an oil company off the coast of Nigeria. On May 26, 2013, at approximately 4:30 in the morning, the vessel capsized in rough Atlantic conditions and sank 100 feet to the ocean floor. Harrison was in the ship's bathroom when it rolled. The lights cut out immediately. Water rushed in from every direction. He heard the ship breaking apart, heard the sounds of his 11 crewmates, and then heard nothing at all. He found an air pocket roughly 4 feet high in what had been the officer's mess, pressed himself into it, and stayed there. The pocket held because of the specific angle at which the inverted ship had come to rest on the seabed, trapping a sealed column of air against the hull. Harrison stood in chest-deep water for several hours, then located a small raised platform he could crouch on. The temperature inside the pocket dropped steadily through the night. He was wearing a thermal wetsuit he had pulled on in the seconds before the ship went under, and it was the only thing keeping his core temperature at a survivable level. He prayed. He did not sleep. At one point, something moved against his leg in the darkness. He didn't reach down to identify it. He did not move. South African salvage divers reached the wreck 60 hours after the capsizing with orders to recover bodies. When the first diver swept his torch through the flooded interior, a hand reached out from the darkness and gripped his arm. Harrison O'Keefe was brought to the surface alive, conscious, and largely unharmed. He was the sole survivor of all 12 people aboard the vessel. Investigators confirmed afterward that each of the three factors, the ship's settling angle, the sealed air chamber, and the thermal wetsuit, had been independently necessary for Harrison to live. Remove any one of them, and he would have been dead within 3 hours. Beck Weathers. Beck Weathers was a Dallas pathologist and recreational climber on a commercial Everest expedition in May 1996. He reached approximately 27,600 feet before altitude-induced retinal damage, a condition in which low oxygen at extreme elevation temporarily disrupts visual function, left him effectively blind in both eyes. His expedition leader told him to wait at that elevation while the summit team pushed upward. He waited. Then one of the worst storms in Everest's recorded history arrived, killing 8 climbers before it passed. When teammates found Beck lying motionless in the snow, his face covered in ice and his hands frozen solid, they reached the only conclusion available to them. He was dead. They left him and descended. Beck was not dead. 12 hours later, after lying exposed on the South Col at approximately minus 40 degrees Celsius, he opened his eyes. He later described a hallucination that arrived with the force of a direct order. He saw his wife's face and understood that if he didn't stand up immediately, he wouldn't see her again. He stood. He could not feel his hands or feet. He walked, staggering, half-blind, following the slope, into Camp 4, where other survivors of the storm found him upright outside a tent. The doctors who examined him that night advised leaving him a second time, concluding that a carry-down posed too much risk and that he was unlikely to survive another night regardless. Beck survived the second night. He was evacuated by helicopter the following morning in what was at the time one of the highest altitude helicopter rescues ever recorded. He lost his right hand, the fingers of his left hand, his nose, and sections of both feet to frostbite. He required multiple reconstructive surgeries. He still climbs. Mauro Prosperi. Mauro Prosperi was an Italian police officer and competitive pentathlete who entered the Marathon des Sables in 1994, a 150-mile race staged across the Moroccan Sahara over 6 days, considered one of the most demanding endurance events on Earth. On day 4 of the race, a sandstorm hit the course with enough force to reduce visibility to nothing within minutes. When it cleared, Mauro was alone. He had been blown approximately 180 miles off course into the Algerian desert. He had enough water for roughly half a day. He began walking in the direction he believed was back toward the race. It was not. By day 3, he had no water. He found a small abandoned shrine and sheltered inside it. He caught desert bats in the dark and consumed their blood and flesh for hydration. When his own urine became too thick and dark to drink safely, he drank it anyway. On the 9th day, he tried to cut his wrist with a penknife. The blood that came out was so concentrated from dehydration that it clotted almost immediately, and he survived the attempt without intending to. On the 10th day, a group of nomadic Tuareg women found him collapsed in the open desert and carried him to their camp. He had lost 35 pounds. He was airlifted to an Algerian hospital, then returned to Italy. The following year, Mauro Prosperi returned to Morocco and entered the Marathon des Sables again. He finished it. Aaron Ralston. Aaron Ralston was a 27-year-old mechanical engineer and experienced solo climber from Aspen, Colorado, who had spent the previous 3 years systematically summiting all 59 of his home state's mountains, exceeding 14,000 feet, almost always without a partner. On April 26, 2003, he drove alone to the trailhead at Blue John Canyon in the remote canyon country of southeastern Utah. He left no note at home. He filed no hiking plan. He told no one his destination. He had done exactly this dozens of times before, and it had never once been a problem. He was several hours into the descent when it happened. He was moving through a narrow slot passage barely 3 feet wide, the sandstone walls rising sheer and smooth on both sides, when an 800-pound chalkstone wedged in the canyon walls above him suddenly shifted. It dropped and pinned his right forearm against the rock face with the full weight of the boulder bearing directly down on the joint. He could not pull free. He could not rotate his wrist. He could not move the boulder in any direction. He was alone in a slot canyon with no phone signal, in a stretch of Utah desert that no one on earth knew he had entered, with a backpack containing approximately 400 milliliters of water, 2 burritos, a headlamp, and an inexpensive multi-tool with a blade he had never thought to sharpen. He spent the first day working through every mechanical option the contents of his pack allowed. He used the multi-tool to chip at the rock surface around his arm. The blade scored the sandstone without removing meaningful material. He rigged the anchor equipment from his climbing pack into a crude pulley system. Tsurash looped it around the boulder and applied his full body weight as counterforce. The boulder did not move. He rationed his water and ate 1 burrito. By the end of day 2, he had finished both the water and the food. He began collecting his own urine in an empty bottle and drinking it. On the morning of day 3, he took out the small camera he had packed and recorded video messages addressed to his parents and his sister. He explained what had happened and described his location as precisely as he could. He told them he was not afraid. He put the camera away and used the multi-tool blade to carve his name into the sandstone wall beside him. Below his name, he carved his date of birth. Below that, he carved a date 3 days ahead, which he had concluded was the most probable date of his death. By day 5, the tissue of his trapped forearm had begun to decompose while still attached to his living body. He could smell it. His estimated body weight had dropped by 40 pounds. He was too dehydrated to produce urine. He had stopped recording messages the day before because he had run out of things to say. He lay against the canyon wall through the night without sleeping, and sometime before dawn on the 6th morning, he had a hallucination so structurally coherent, he would later describe it not as a dream, but as a visitation. He saw a small child running across a sunlit wooden floor toward him. He picked the child up. He understood with absolute clarity that the child was his future son. When it ended, he made his decision. He had understood for at least 2 days that the multi-tool's blade could cut through soft tissue. The obstacle was not the flesh. It was the radius and ulna, the 2 bones of the forearm, which the dull blade could not saw through. That morning, Aaron used his free arm and the leverage of his own torso to press his trapped forearm downward against the boulder until he felt the radius snap. He repositioned and pressed again until the ulna broke. Both fractures were completely deliberate. Both required sustained, conscious force applied against his own skeleton until the bone gave way. He then used the blade to complete the amputation below the elbow. The procedure took approximately 1 hour. He did not lose consciousness. He later told interviewers that the instant the last tissue separated and the boulder's pressure was no longer transmitted through his body, he felt a wave of relief so complete it momentarily overwhelmed every other sensation. He fashioned a tourniquet from the flexible tubing of his hydration pack, rigging the clamp mechanism using only his left hand and his teeth. He set up his rappel device one-handed and descended 65 feet down the rock face immediately below the amputation site. Then he started walking. Over the following hours, he covered approximately 7 miles of open desert terrain, exposed slick rock, sandy washes, loose stone, in full afternoon heat, his tourniquet holding, his pace steady. He was close to a mile from the trailhead when he encountered a Dutch family, A father and mother and their young daughter, who had entered the canyon from the opposite end on a day hike. They gave him water and food. The father's emergency call reached a search and rescue helicopter that had been deployed earlier that morning after friends in Aspen, alarmed by his absence, had filed a missing persons report. The crew spotted him below them on foot, still moving, and airlifted him to Allen Memorial Hospital in Moab. He was in surgery within the hour. He made a full recovery. Surgeons confirmed afterward that the tourniquet had been applied correctly and had not slipped at any point during the 7-mile walk out. Had it loosened, he would have bled to death in under 4 minutes. Had he not broken both bones before beginning the cut, the blade would not have been capable of completing the amputation before he lost consciousness from pain. Had the Dutch family not entered the canyon from the opposite direction that afternoon, the search team would have had no confirmed sighting and no specific location for at least another 12 hours. The boulder that held him weighed 800 pounds. His amputated forearm weighed 8 pounds. If you found this video interesting, subscribe for more, or leave a comment below telling us which story surprised you most.